Okay, I think it's safe to get started now. Make sure we can keep the schedule. So first of all, good morning to everybody who's with us on the call. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Kibo Ngoi, and I'm the Marketing and Communications Officer for Accountability Lab. And today we'll be having a panel discussion titled Local Voices Leading to Local Solutions, Feedback Loops in Pakistan, Nepal, and Zimbabwe. We're joined today by 3 of our staff members from network labs across the world. We're going to be sharing the different applications of our Civic Action Teams program. So just to start things off, I'd like to give you just a bit of information about what our Civic Action Teams program is about. So the Civic Action Teams, or CIVACs as we call them for short, are a pioneering citizen feedback, dialogue, and community voice platform to ensure accountability in the development process. CIVACs have now collected critical information from hundreds of communities across Nepal, Liberia, and Mali, solving daily problems for citizens and closing the loop on challenges related to everything from migration to human trafficking to natural resource management and security issues. One of our panelists today is joining us from an Accountability Lab Nepal. We'll be talking about the governance applications of the CIVACs program in Nepal. And just to give you a taste of that, we'd like to show you a little video that talks about an application of CIVACs that we've been doing in Nepal called Governance. Sina, could you please line up the video?
मैले आफ्नो कलम अगाडि त्यो स्टोरी मार्फत चलाइरहेको छु के त्यो पनि महिलाका लागि पछाडी परेका महिलाका लागि उनीहरुका हिंसाका कुरा अगाडि ल्याएको चाहिँ सबैभन्दा मन परेको कुरा त्यही हो
धनगढी उपमहानगरपालिकालाई लैंगिक मैत्री उपमहानगरपालिका बनाउन सकेको भए अब लैंगिक मैत्री उपमहानगरपालिका यतिकै त हुँदैन त्यसको लागि त हामी भित्र पनि त केही कुरा त हुनु पर्यो हामीसँग त्यो बुझ्ने क्षमता हुनु पर्यो जहिले पनि हामी के भन्छौं यो एउटा जेन्डरको चस्मा लाग्नु पर्छ भन्छौं नि त अब त्यो चस्माले हेर्न सक्ने शक्ति हामी सबै जति जनप्रतिनिधि छौं हाम्रो कर्मचारी जीवहरु हुनुहुन्छ उहाँहरुमा भयो भनेपछि मात्रै यो नगरपालिकालाई लैंगिक मैत्री बनाउन सक्छौं
थुप्रै मान्छेहरु हामीसँग खुल्नु हुँदैन नि त कसरी उहाँलाई चाहिँ खुलाउन सकिन्छ त उहाँहरुका समस्यालाई बाहिर कसरी ल्याउन सकिन्छ भन्ने कुरा पनि हामीले फेलोको रूपमा पनि थाहा पायौं
चाहिँ जुनसुकै काम गर्दा जुनसुकै बजेट बाँडफाँड गर्दा हामीले कम्तीमा जेन्डरका कुराहरू हामीले नछुटाउनु पर्ने कुरा मैले देखे र त्यसले गर्दा सानो हाम्रो सपोर्टले पनि उहाँहरुको चाहिँ एकदमै लाइफ नै एउटा चेन्ज हुने सम्भावना पनि मैले देखेको छु
कसरी हामीले समाजको यो दुईटा आँखाले बराबरीको हिसाबले जो तल परेको समुदायमा तल परेको व्यक्ति छ भने त्यसलाई हामीले कसरी उचाएर यो माथिको व्यक्तिसम्म ल्याउन सक्ने हो त भन्ने किसिमको जो यो कार्यक्रममा छ एकदमै राम्रो
Thank you, Sina. So that was a taste of our governance program, governance application of the Civic Action Teams program in Nepal. And we'll be hearing from one of our staff members in Nepal, Suresh Chand, speaking about that. But first, we'd like to begin the proceedings by having a bit of audience engagement. So we've got a poll that we'd like you all to participate in. So the question on the poll is, how would you rate your government in terms of finding creative ways to disseminate policy information? And so if you could just answer the poll based on on a scale of 1 to 7, 1 being the worst, or 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, and 10 being the best. We'll just give a minute or two for all of you to answer, and then we'll continue. Okay, if I'm not mistaken, it looks like we have 100% participation, 9 of 9. Okay, so some interesting answers coming out here. I see the highest seems to be on 3. So yeah, not great. 33% 3. Below that, you have some people saying 4, some people saying 2. And the highest we have is 6 and 5. Okay, interesting. Okay, it would also be interesting to really find out the distribution in terms of the countries we have represented today in terms of our audience. So yeah, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, say which country you're dialing in from, and we're gonna jump straight into the panel discussion, talking to our different panelists. Please, we'll have time for questions after all 3 speakers have gotten a chance to speak. So please hold on to your questions. You can also share them in the chat if you prefer to do that. And we'll have plenty of time for questions at the very end. But now we'd like to jump straight into the program and start speaking to our program manager from Accountability Lab Nepal, Suresh Chan. Hi, Suresh.
Hi, Kibu.
How are you doing today?
Yeah, good.
Wonderful.
How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. Awesome. So I think we can dig straight in. And so for you, Suresh, I'd like to ask you, how does the governance project under Civic bring new voices into Nepal's patriarchal caste system and help find solutions to issues of gender equity, local development, and open government?
Thank you, Kibu, for the question. Talking about the governance and governance, let me start with how progressive is our local government towards gender issue. So we have 753 local units in total. We have a provision for women participation in women's representation in each sectors. There should be at least 2 female representatives out of 5 in each ward level. Gender equity and social inclusion policies are in place, and government introduced gender responsive budget from 2017, mandatory to have gender friendly infrastructure in every government and non-government institution, and many more. If you see those data, no doubt you can imagine how progressive we are. But reality is different. They look like, the local representatives, especially the female representatives, they look like rubber stamps. Their voices are not being heard as part of decision making. Implementation is weak and power structure simply do not allow for the gender equity. Marginalized communities are excluded from program selection and development. And biggest problem is, what? Yes, it is male dominated bureaucracy. They easily manipulate the laws and policies. Witnessing all this, we came up with this idea called governance. You have already explained it. Governance means the gender in governance. For this, we first met a deputy mayor, of one of the local unit in Far West region who can easily influence her authority. We had a series of discussion with her. We talked about the problem, challenges, and tools to solve those problems. Initially, she was also not convinced with this idea of the governance, but after a series of discussion, finally she has shown her interest to introduce the idea of governance in her local unit. Then after we jointly designed this program, for this we had a need assessment workshop. It was totally different than previous workshops conducted by the local unit. You know, they were participated in previous workshops, you know, those kind of so-called need assessment workshop, but they have no kind of space to raise their concern and issues, questions as well. So in this need assessment workshop, we have provided them equal access to raise their issues, provided their inputs. You know, they have, you know, participated happily, and you know, they after ultimately we have succeeded to, you know, design a complete program called governance. Within this governance project, so the first tool we used to sensitize the issue was the inclusion fellowship. You know, in inclusion fellowship, we have selected 8 inclusion fellows from diverse sectors, from LGBTIQ community to Dalit community to victim of violence, you know, disabled community, media to aspiring political leader. We have designed workshops for them for advocacy, storytelling, and filmmaking workshop as well. They closely engaged with their own local units, brought story from the ground, and made short movies on gender identity and inclusion. We highlighted their story in bulletin. You know, we run radio shows. You know, we invited them in radio shows, and you know, we have provided space to share their stories. You know, some ground issues. We have highlighted some issues in social media, and also we have provided some information that can help them to, you know, connect with the government services. And then you know, a simple step has shown some changes. You know, first, the local unit had policy dialogue where women from different community were invited. Now the local unit to have their own, you know, gender equality and social inclusion policies. You know, the local unit ensuring the local participation in local development. In Nepal, we have a provision. You know, there is a 7 stages of, you know, budget and planning processes, but no a single local unit to, you know, invite and provide the space to participate in the different caste group, you know, the marginalized community women. You know, they don't have kind of, you know, space to participate, and you know, they and suggest government to design the program in favor of them. You know, but after this inclusion fellowship, the fellows were, you know, created a group in their own community, and you know, they have consulted with their ward chairs, and they participated in, you know, last year's, you know, budget and program in community level budget consultation process. Almost 13 groups were, you know, participated in budget consultation processes, and their, you know, concern were addressed. Similarly, Deputy Mayor having, you know, frequent meeting with the women and LGBTI community and receiving their feedback and incorporating, you know, their feedback in their annual program. And also fellows, you know, the inclusion fellows were communicating local issues to the local unit. You know, they are from the local, they are the locals. You know, they know the issue in the ground, and they are connecting those issues to the local government. And also at the same time, they are also connecting the government, you know, services to the citizen as well, because most of the citizens, they are unaware about what the services is their government providing. So they are connecting those, you know, citizen as well as the government at the same time. Also, you know, if you see next result is, you know, another result is, you know, women are leading local consumer groups. You know, in Nepal, you know, all local units have to have, you know, you have to form a consumer group to, you know, further, you know, development process. If you have to, you know, build a road in front of your houses, so you have to organize, you have to, you know, develop a consumer group, and previously there were all the male leading consumer groups. After this fellowship program, out of 47, 13 group were leading by the women's. Also, the fellows are growing as a leader with tangible skills. Some of the fellows writing stories, and they are publishing in local newspapers. Some of the fellows are making videos. Some of the fellows taking photos from the community and providing those photos to the local newspaper. And some of the fellows who were from the LGBTI community and the disabled community, they are also leading on their organizations. For instance, I would like to share one story. Sunita BK, a 23 years old girl from the marginalized Dalit community, who was even unaware about the government's front door services. After being fellow, she has brought 7 different stories from her communities. Some of were published in bulletin, and some were covered in our radio program. Gradually, community started recognizing her as an active advocate in her community. Now she is an advisory committee member in her ward council. I think this shows problem is there, but solution is also there. In a local level, we just need to understand ground narrative and bring local voices on the forefronts. I think that's it from my side right now. I will come back if anyone have some questions. Thank you, Kibo.
Thank you so much, Suresh. That was Suresh Chand from Accountability Nepal, talking about the gender equity application of our CIVICs program in Nepal with governance. If you have any questions for Suresh, please save them until the end of the session. We'll have plenty of time for questions after the speakers have all gotten a chance to speak. But moving on from Nepal, we'd like to actually move on now to Zimbabwe, where we'll be speaking to CIVIC's project officer, Tino Tenda Chishiri. Hi, Tino.
Hi, Kibo. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Happy to be here and talk about some of the work that we've been doing in Zimbabwe.
Awesome. All right. So I think we can jump straight into it. So in the context of CIVICs in Zimbabwe, could you tell us a bit about how CSOs create the space for governments to collaborate effectively with citizens and marginalized communities?
Okay. All right. Thanks so much, Kibo. So in Zimbabwe, CSOs have definitely been playing a big role in creating spaces for collaboration, between the government and the marginalized communities and citizens. And I'll speak to what we as Accountability Lab Zimbabwe have been doing with CIVICs. So maybe what I'll do is I will start off by giving a background to the context in which we are implementing CIVICs in. So CIVICs is a component of a larger project that's called New Narratives for Accountability in Zimbabwe. And it's trying to address entrenched political, social, and economic dynamics around accountability, which have historically and largely been negative. A lot of citizens feel they don't have a voice. They feel powerless to do anything about the challenges they face. There's no trust, or there are low levels of trust between government and citizens. And they're also very minimal. There are no relationships between the government and citizens to be able to foster that sort of accountability. So having recognized and identified these challenges, we came in as Accountability Lab with the CIVICs program to just try and cover some of those gaps. So with CIVICs in Zimbabwe, what we've mainly been trying to do is to create platforms to amplify the voices of citizens, especially the marginalized communities, the marginalized groups such as women, such as youth, and also been trying to build trust through constant engagement, through fostering constant engagement on these platforms or within these spaces that we have created. And we've also been trying to help leaders realize, that citizens are allies, that they can work together with in coming up with solutions to local development problems. So some of the platforms that have been created through Civics have been what we call listening meetings, or what we call community consultation meetings, where the community gets together and defines what the problem is. And I think this is a very important step, because in order to come up with solutions, you need to be able to correctly define the problem, and who better to define these problems than the people that actually live the reality of these problems, and to also be involved in defining what the problem is, instead of having that problem being imposed on you. So yeah, we have listening meetings or community consultation meetings that we have regularly, where the community comes together and they have discussions and deliberate on what some of the problems are. And then after that, we collect further information around those problems through surveys, through further conversations within the community. And then once that's been done, the findings of the surveys is fed back to the communities through the bulletins and the radio shows that I think Suresh had also referred to. So in feeding back this information back to the community, we're also feeding back that information together with rights and policy frameworks that are related to some of the problems that would have been named by the community. So in feeding back that information back to them, together with that information, the information around their rights and the policy frameworks related to the problem, the idea is to then equip the citizens, with information that can help them to constructively engage from an informative point of view with the local leaders on some of the solutions, to the problems that they face. So also within those dialogue platforms, we bring together the community and the leaders to deliberate on these problems, based on the evidence coming from the surveys and from the various discussions that happen, and then try and come up with solutions, try and have a process of co-creation of those solutions together. So what we've noticed is that because of the emphasis of Civics on collaboration, on co-creation, and on constructive engagement, the local leaders have been very eager to work with citizens and engage because of this approach around constructive engagement. So I think the approach that Civics uses has been very useful in fostering that effective collaboration between the two, between the communities and the government, and in this case, specifically the local authorities. So maybe I'm just going to give a couple of examples of some of the issues that have been coming out, and some of the ways that the government and the communities have been collaborating. So we're working in two areas with informal traders, and through Civics, we've created platforms where informal traders could engage with the local authorities. Historically, that relationship has always been quite hostile. There's always been a cat and mouse game between the local authorities and the informal traders. So for instance, in one particular area, there were no market areas at all for them to be selling from. So then they ended up selling from undesignated areas, which resulted in them being arrested, having their goods confiscated, and so on. And so through Civics, we've been trying to create platforms where we can facilitate dialogue and collaboration between the two, so that there's an understanding of where the informal traders are coming from, and so that the local authorities can get firsthand information around the lived realities and experiences of the informal traders, and through that then come together to come up with solutions around that. And so in one of the areas, through constant engagement, through a number of dialogue platforms, out of that, the local authorities have actually listened and have started constructing vending spaces for some of these informal traders. The same as well in another area with informal traders. There were also challenges around the engagement between the two, and also around a lack of adequate vending spaces. So through the dialogue as well, there have been developments that have come out of that, and vending spaces have started to be constructed. But at the same time as well, the local authority has gained an appreciation of the importance of including, citizens in decision making, and also, consulting and, trying to work together with them to come up with solutions. So even within those meetings, they've adopted an open door policy where they've invited the traders that, if ever they have any ideas around how certain problems can be solved, they're very open to come. So that's something that's been very encouraging. And also in another area, we've been working around the issue of water shortages, where one particular area only receives 1 to 2 days of running water, and the rest of the week there's no running water. So there's been an over-reliance on community boreholes, and that has given rise, to other secondary problems, such as sexual harassment of women at community boreholes. So through engagement within some of these dialogue platforms, communities and the local authorities have come together and realized that have realized that one of the ways to solve these water shortages would be around lobbying for a local source of water, because currently they're relying on another city for their own water. So through that, a campaign has been started where the local authorities and the communities are lobbying central government for funds to be released so that there can be construction of a local water source. So those are just some of the examples of how CSOs can come in and create platforms that can foster collaboration, effective collaboration between communities and the government. Thanks, Kibo.
Thank you so much, Tino Tenda, from facilitating business for informal traders to actually preventing water shortage from setting up a community borehole. I think there's a lot of great examples of the different applications of Civex. It's literally anything that a certain community needs. It's really just about facilitating dialogue between the community and power holders. And you just see like it can literally be applied to anything that citizens actually need to communicate to authorities about. So thank you for sharing all of those great examples. Again, if you have any questions for Tina Tenda about that, please hold on to them. We'll start taking questions at the end of the session once all the speakers have spoken. We have one more speaker that we will be speaking to now. Would like to introduce a projects coordinator from Accountability Lab Pakistan, Amna Rajput. Hi Amna.
Hi Kibo, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm great, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. So, digging into Civex and its applications in Pakistan, can you tell us a bit about what are the kinds of methods CSOs and communities can use to help governments deliver public messages creatively?
Sure, thank you, Kibo. So I would like to share some of the work that we are doing here in Pakistan as a CSO and some of the methods that we have opted. So basically during the second half of the year 2018, we started the Civic Action Teams program that aimed on closing citizen feedback loops and tried to ensure on building accountability, like not only in communities, but also in the development process. But like when the coronavirus outbreak occurred, worldwide, the situation, it quickly led towards like the spread of misinformation, myths, and fake news around COVID-19. And then and there, the access to accurate and real-time data was needed more than ever. So having previously worked on closing citizen feedback loopholes, we turned the focus of our program towards reducing the gap between government and citizens around COVID-19. And this is basically how the Coronavirus Civex campaign began. So while the government was playing its role in facilitating citizens and providing accurate information about pandemic situation, and the different actions that were being implemented, our campaign was able to identify some remote areas and marginalized groups that had no means of access to that information. So basically they were not benefiting from that information. So then and there, the campaign then extensively worked towards facilitating these disadvantaged groups. So talking about the methods that we use, like we started on the grassroots level by engaging around like 300 volunteers from these marginalized groups across Pakistan. And these included females and transgenders who were then trained around countering misinformation that was drastically being spread within their communities and that needed to be addressed immediately. After their training, each of these volunteers created WhatsApp groups with their community members and then used it as a means of disseminating accurate information around COVID-19. Another step that we took was developing of weekly bulletins because we wanted a way of continuous information, the flow of information to continuously go within these disadvantaged communities. And these bulletins basically focused on addressing all kinds of misinformation and dissemination of factual information on COVID-19. And considering the need, these bulletins were developed in national as well as local and regional languages because we wanted people to understand more on the situation and just so that like the information is being presented in their local languages as well. Apart from that, the content of these bulletins was drafted in a way that the terms, sometimes in scientific and medical science, terms are explained in a bit of a complex type of way. So we tried to make these, tried to use the content in a way that it was easy to digest, and it included simpler words for like the layman to understand. And as these may at times, become difficult for understand, so we tried to use simpler language. Apart from that, through our research, we learned that like WhatsApp was a platform that was extensively being used by citizens during the pandemic here in Pakistan. And so we created a dedicated WhatsApp channel that was established to serve as a two-way communication channel where the citizens could directly reach out to our campaign with any questions, with any concerns and queries that they have or they wanted to be addressed without having any barrier between them. So this also ensured that people would have, information related to COVID-19 and vaccination or SOPs like in their hands. Apart from that, our campaign also took on board provincial departments and influencers from those remote areas, and with whom we created multiple videos around COVID-19, around SOPs, around vaccination, which were then pushed out on various social media platforms. Then basically we gave a different lens of hope during the outbreak, and we engaged youth and we brought forward young bloggers, YouTubers and journalists to bring forth stories of hope, stories of resilience and positive behavior of people who were going above and beyond during the pandemic to help others through our virtual media caravan platform. So we provided that platform through which, different stories can be disseminated and brought forward. Apart from that, in another approach, we pushed out messages on vaccination centers and different myths on vaccination through radio transmission, because even till today, there are some areas in Pakistan where the radio transmission is the only way of receiving information. And basically, so we didn't want to leave any stone unturned. And basically, these messages that we created were made in national and local languages and were forwarded to local and national radio stations. Apart from that, while also respecting the values of these communities that we were working in or trying to help, we learned that for women from these remote areas, the only source of information was from their male counterparts. So whenever their husband, their brother or their son would come home, then and there they would basically be providing information or the updates around the situation of the COVID pandemic. And so keeping the health and safety of women in mind, we engaged local government female representatives and trained them on countering misinformation, caring for COVID infected people and practicing SOPs properly. So these representatives then went into their respective communities and trained women, and then those women then further trained other women while going into their own respective communities. So this is basically how a chain of awareness developed in this way. So these are some of the methods that we have used in our campaign, considering the situation in Pakistan. However, some other methods that we can include could be conducting local awareness campaigns where people from where like people we can involve from these communities understand more about the situation that's happening, and the safe actions that they can take to prevent any trouble or any kind of mishap. Also, local people, they have a more impact on their community than anyone from the outside. Apart from that, town meetings or municipal meetings can also be conducted where like the issues of concern can be raised. And they can be discussed, making people feel that they're also involved in the process. Another way could be like, conducting dialogues, and these dialogues can include CSOs and government representatives that can be arranged, like on different platforms to give or to provide a complete lens of the situation. Another method could be like, CSOs, they can sponsor public service messages that are been developed by the government and further help in disseminating them further in these communities. We can also develop, like clusters can be formed between CSOs, the government and the health department. So like the same message would be disseminated through all these means or through all these channels, and it would have a greater impact. And lastly, I think we can also like involve the youth through either like digital platforms or conducting sessions at the educational institutions, which could result in more acceptance in communities. So yeah, these are some of the ways that CSOs and communities can play their part in helping the government push forward messages and create a greater impact. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Amna, especially for giving us some insight on the coronavirus CIVEX campaign, which again is another example of the adaptability of the CIVEX framework and how spreading accurate, reliable information, especially to communities who are struggling to get reliable information around coronavirus, became so important last year. And I know it's something that we continue to do in several of our countries, including Pakistan. So well done on the work that your team has been doing on that. And thank you for sharing that with us. So yes, I think we can now go into the question and answer round. And thank you again to all of the speakers. And so there are some questions that have already come up in the chat. So I'd like to just jump into these questions before we give people from the floor a chance to speak. I see you, Guido. I hope I'm not mispronouncing that, but just keep your hand up, Guido, and all right, thank you. Okay, so the first question I have here is from Thierry Sanzi Bokali. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing this. But the question here is, so citizen participation is one of the great absentees of public policies on the continent, African continent, when it comes to the construction of the territory, the involvement in the development of the territories. There should be coalitions between stakeholders to have a legislative framework and to make it effective. What about other regions and how do we go about it? Would any of the panelists like to pick up this question?
Yeah, can I go ahead?
Yes, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I think the civic participation or public participation is a major problem in Nepal as well. Even from local level to national level development. The constitution have assured citizens participation in everywhere. Even in a local simple local level development process. Even in local level budget consultation process, there should be participation from different caste group to different sector like education, health, marginalized community to targeted group. There should be participation, but this is just in paper, not in practice. Even in national level development, there should be participation. There should be participation in all sector, but in practice there is no progress in practice. That's why this create holes for the corruption and everything, conflict and everything. Problem is there. Yeah.
Yes, I think that kind of participation is a common problem on different regions. So thank you for that response, Suresh. I hope that answers your question, Thierry. I think that there's another question here, and I think this one is specifically addressed to Tino Tender from Natalie Dijkman. Again, sorry if I'm mispronouncing anything here, but Natalie says, hi there, I'm Natalie and I'm one of the founders of SEMA, an SEMA, an East Africa Accountability Initiative based in Kampala. Thank you, Tino Tender, for your interesting insights on what you do on dialogue in Zimbabwe. Do you at all leverage technologies to improve such dialogues? You mentioned radio, but I'm curious if mobile technologies is also a way to expand your work. I think that's the first of two questions there. If you want to maybe try and answer the first one, Tina.
Okay, thanks, Natalie, for your question. Yes, I think we definitely do try to leverage technologies to improve dialogues, more so in the era of COVID-19, where, you know, we were forced into lockdowns. But, you know, so the dialogues had to continue. So as of late, we've definitely been trying to leverage more, especially on mobile technologies, using platforms such as Facebook. So we've also just been trying to understand better, you know, which platforms are widely used and try and leverage on those. So within Zimbabwe, the most used platforms have been Facebook and WhatsApp being number one because of its accessibility and also because it doesn't use a lot of data. So there are a lot of factors that we take into account because, you know, the mobile costs are high in Zimbabwe, mobile data costs are high in Zimbabwe, as well as some areas connectivity is very poor. So using platforms, you know, such as Zoom, the bandwidth in some areas isn't very strong enough to support such connections. But yeah, I think we've definitely been leveraging more on mobile technologies such as WhatsApp to be able to be able to carry out these dialogues. And we've also been using mobile platforms such as Kobo Collect as a way to collect information and then use that to then facilitate the dialogue. So we've definitely been doing that more so in the era of COVID-19.
Thank you, Tina. I think this was an excellent question because leveraging these kind of mobile technologies is very important for reaching the most marginalized and vulnerable communities. So Natalie actually has a second question for you here. She says, I'm curious if you could share a bit more about what levers exactly incentivize the government to respond to the demands of the community during such dialogues. What motivates them to respond to, i.e. the informal traders' demands where they didn't earlier?
So what I have, so from my experience, so my presentation was on how CSOs, you know, bring in or foster that collaboration. So in the past, there's been a very uneasy relationship between CSOs and government. And so the approach has always been perceived as being confrontational. So, you know, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong, you're doing this wrong. But I think CivActs, the beauty of CivActs is that it's the approach that is used is one that is based on constructive engagement, based on co-creation of solutions. So I think it's in the approach that we used to say, you know, we're not coming to attack. What we're coming to do is we're simply just coming to discuss in a constructive way how best we can solve some of the challenges within the community. And one of the other ways as well has been through the surveys that we do, the dialogues are then based on evidence. So the engagement is not only based on emotions. You know, sometimes people can get quite emotional, and understandably so, because, you know, you're living the realities of these challenges. But we also then come in with that evidence to say, you know, we've talked to this number of people and this number of people are affected by this problem. So yeah, I think basically those two approaches, using a less confrontational approach where you're trying to foster constructive engagement, one that's not based on, you know, always confronting, and then also using an evidence-based approach has been one of the motivating factors for them to respond.
Thank you so much, Tino, and thank you again to Natalie for the very insightful questions. I think on the chat we just have some comments. There's no more questions, so yeah, I'd really like to give Guido the floor. Sorry so much. Sorry for keeping you waiting for a while, but please, Guido, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you very much, and thanks everyone for the contributions. I was just curious because I'm currently working on a project in which I work for Klingendal, so for the conflict research unit, and I'm trying to advocate, let's say, for more community-driven approaches to infrastructure building in context of fragility and conflict. So I was wondering, Suresh mentioned before something about some road building experiences, and I was wondering if anyone here in the virtual room has some interesting experiences to share about instances in which community-driven approaches were instrumental to build sustainable infrastructure that was conflict sensitive in fragile settings. So if anyone has nice success stories, I would be happy to hear them and maybe to be in touch with you also later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your question, Guido. So any of our panelists, feel free. I don't know if anybody has a response for the question. I think you mentioned an example from Suresh, but I think it's any one of you can take up the question.
Yeah, I can share some experience. So while we were working in one of the Middle West, I mean one of the province. So there was road construction made by the province government. So they have they have all thing done, but they have not consulted with the community, and it took more than 2.5 years to convince the community. And after that the local government was formed, and there is a provision, if the local government handle those kind of infrastructure development, including building or roads. So there is a provision, if the local government is building some kind of infrastructure more than 5 million Nepali rupees, then they have to form a consumer group, and they don't have right to build their oneself. So after that they have consulted with the beneficiaries, I mean the citizens who are kind of connected with this kind of link road. So after that they have access kind of environmental degradation assessment, conflict resolution assessment, and they have provided space for the citizen as well as, and more than I think 63 individuals were a member in that community committee. And after that they have handled this road project, and it was completed within I think 17 months, and it was not more than 17.5 kilometer. So yeah, it was completed after engagement of the citizens. Yeah, it was kind of a good example. If the citizen are participated in government project, then it will succeed. Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Wonderful. Thank you again, Guido, for the question, and thank you, Suresh, for taking that up. Okay, so I don't think we have any more questions in the chat. If there's anybody else who'd like to ask our speakers a question, please feel free. Please raise your hand and we'll get to you. Okay, going once, going twice. All right, I think I think there are no more questions from the floor. So if there are no further questions from the floor, I think I'd just like to give each of the panelists maybe just a minute of final words, and maybe just say a little something about what your biggest takeouts have been in terms of the CIVEX program and how you've been able to apply it in your individual countries. I think we can go backwards from who we finished with. Amna, maybe just take a minute for closing words there.
Sure, thank you, Kibo. So basically, if I talk about like the biggest outcome that we received, or the biggest success that we received, was that through implementing these awareness sessions and awareness campaigns in communities, we were able to deeply reach into communities and, you know, bring forward stories of people who had been affected by COVID and so by the COVID-19, and they were just finding a way to come out and help others. So we had during these awareness sessions, we did have many females come out and provide awareness around, you know, the different difficulties and happenings that she had been through, or the calamity her family had been through. And she just tried to promote all these members of the communities to get themselves vaccinated. So this was one of the success, I think. Apart from this, another was that the transgender people here in Pakistan, even before the pandemic, they were, you know, like they were basically ignored, and they were, when the pandemic occurred, basically, whenever they went out to you know, get themselves tested or, you know, go for vaccination, people wouldn't accept them because they wouldn't be categorized in a particular gender. And basically, this was one of the ways they were being ignored. But through our awareness sessions, there was awareness around, you know, like transgender people, they also have their rights. And from our campaign, we were able to bring forward this issue, and a lot of people from these remote areas and these disadvantaged groups, like a lot of transgender people, were then able to be accepted towards vaccination. A particular vaccination center was basically given to them where they could come and get themselves vaccinated. So I think these were the successes that we gained from this campaign of ours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amna. I think now we can move back to Tina Tender just to give us a minute of just like a final word.
All right, thanks, Kibo. Yeah, I think for me, the biggest takeaway, you know, from CIVEX in Zimbabwe has been that, you know, citizens' voices do matter. And I think it's something that they're starting to realize themselves. You know, some examples are that apart from the CIVEX program, some communities are actually starting to take the initiative to actively engage in some processes such as budget consultation meetings. You know, they're organizing themselves and going to attend to get their voice heard, you know, women, young people. So that's been very, very encouraging. In one area, there were issues to do with garbage collection, where garbage is not being collected for as long as weeks, months on end. And, you know, those communities raised their voice around, you know, their dissatisfaction around that. And as a result of that, that local authority was actually fined by the Environmental Management Agency within our country because of that. So I think from CIVEX, they're starting to see that, you know, their voice matters. Which is very encouraging. And I think once citizens start to realize the power of their voice and the importance of their voice to these development processes, I think it'll do wonders for accountability in Zimbabwe. So that's my biggest takeaway from CIVEX.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Tina Tender. I think that's a big hope that we have for CIVEX and all of the communities that we operate in, that citizens realize that they actually do have a voice when they band together, and that, you know, real change can happen. So thanks again for that. And I think finally, we'll just hear from Suresh, if you could just give us your final words and kind of like the biggest takeaway that you've gotten from the work that you've done on CIVEX in Nepal.
Thank you, Kibo, again. So I think for me, biggest takeaway from this governance project is, so if you allow people to, participate from, program design to, program implementation to, celebrate outcome together, it will, works always, if you see the governance project, we incentivize first, local government, then we designed together a program, governance program, and we invited, citizens to, input, provide their input and feedbacks. Then they, they engaged, and, we got, this kind of, healthy outcomes. So yeah, I think the participation in measure, and you should, ensure the participation from beginning to end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suresh. I think we have another comment here from Thierry. So some countries are doing well in Africa in terms of participation of women and young people under 35 in politics, but the road is still long. The legislative text exists, but the application, when it is not stammering, is ignored. We should perhaps surely continue the advocacy with other approaches, such as culture as a vector of change. Our Gender Commission is working on an equality charter, and your participations and contributions are welcome, and there's a link there. Well, thank you for that comment, Thierry. I think what I'm also going to do here is just drop a link in the chat to our website, and specifically to the Accountability Lab website, and specifically to the Civics Action Teams page for anybody who wants more information on the campaign. And of course, there's also a contact us page on the website for anybody who wants to reach out to the lab and connect further. So I think we're at the point, 2 minutes left in the program, so just a bit of time to spare. I think I'm at the point where I can thank everybody for joining us, all of the audience members from different countries. Thank you for connecting and joining in on the panel discussion. And a big thank you to the panelists for coming in and sharing their insight and knowledge from different countries and applications of the CIVAX program. Thank you to everybody, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. For those of you who will be watching more sessions, I hope you enjoy those. And yes, that's all from our side.